Hey guys, this is Sebastian Natural Mystic Pollock bringing you a quick theory video about when we should Cbet for RakebackDollars.com. First, we need to answer some questions before we can determine whether we want to Cbet. There are a lot of factors that go into whether we should or shouldn't Cbet. First and most importantly, what am I trying to accomplish? How many opponents are in the hand? Am I in or out of position? Am I looking to play a big pot or a small pot? What's the board texture? How does our opponent perceive us? And how do we perceive our opponents? For this video, we're really going to be focusing on how we perceive our opponents, and whether their calling range is elastic or inelastic. Again, whether we're in or out of position is very important. How many opponents is very important. But for right now, we're just going to look at what am I trying to accomplish. If we can answer what we're trying to accomplish, usually it's going to help lead us to the answer of whether we should or shouldn't Cbet. First, why do we bet in the first place? When I'm working with students and coaching, I hear all sorts of different answers to this question, and usually they just have they have nothing to do with the reason why they're betting. In general, and it's pretty common practice and pretty standard that we have three reasons for betting. We're either betting for value, as in we have a big hand that we're trying to build a big pot and we want to get much money in as possible. Two, as a bluff. Maybe our hand has no value, but we think there's a likely chance that the board texture didn't hit our opponent and that they're likely to fold, so we're turning our hand into a complete bluff. And lastly, as a semi-bluff, maybe we have a draw that we're looking to, if the opponent folds, we're happy, but at the same time we're looking to build a pot, so therefore if we do hit, we'll be able to get maximum value from our hand, or possibly maybe we even have a bottom pair hand that at this point doesn't have too much value, but it can improve. And we'd just be just as happy if our opponent folded. Now, what are the reasons that we might check? First, to control the size of the pot. Maybe we are out of position and we have a good enough hand that we want to call a bet, but if we bet, we can't call a raise, so therefore we're going to check and to prevent that from happening. Maybe it's a hand that we want to show down, and so therefore, and only get one street of value, so therefore maybe we're going to wait until later streets to get some value. So again, we're going to check to control the size of the pot. Perhaps we want to trap our opponent or possibly let them catch up. If we have pocket jacks on a Jack 7-3 rainbow board, it's very unlikely that our opponent has hit any piece of this board or has a hand that will be able to call a bet. So maybe we check the hand in order to let our opponent either hit an overcard or maybe pick up a draw, maybe make a worse set, or whatever it may be. So that way we can extract maximum value on later streets by raising them. Or maybe we're checking to induce. With the same situation, maybe we have top set and we know our opponent doesn't have a very strong hand range, so therefore we're checking to allow him to bet, so we can either call him down if we think he's going to bet a lot, or possibly raise him, or whatever it is, but we're trying to induce a bluff out of the villain. Speaking of board textures, again, very standard what wet and dry board textures are. We are going to quick look at them because it is important when we're determining whether our opponent's calling range is elastic or inelastic, that we at least know what are wet boards and what are dry boards. Again, pretty standard. A monotone connected board with three broadways is pretty much as wet as you can get. The Jack 10-4 board with, again, the two Broadway cards with the flush draw on it, it's a pretty wet board. The board next, we have the connected board, the 10-9-8 board connected. Pretty wet board because we have, three cards in a row to a straight that are going to hit a lot of people, are going to have pairs and draws and things of that nature, overcards and gut shots and things like that. And then lastly, the monotone board is a pretty wet board with an ace. A lot of people are going to be calling with an ace. A lot of people are going to be calling with any spade, that sort of thing. Dry boards are boards that, again, just like the name implies, they're opposite of the wet boards, and they are less likely to hit opponents' ranges. So an ace 7-5 rainbow board, again, an opponent's either going to have an ace or they're not, or they're going to have a pair smaller than an ace, but again, hard to get value from them. 9-9-4, again, another very dry board. Opponents don't have too many nines in the range. A 4 is not a very strong second pair as is, so most opponents are going to whiff on this board. King 8-3 rainbow, Queen 9-5 rainbow. These are other examples of dry boards. Something that I think is very overlooked is how do our opponents perceive us? I think we spend a lot of time uh, analyzing and breaking down our opponents, but I think a key factor is opponents or people often overlook how do our opponents perceive us. So, if we've run three bluffs at the table and we've gotten caught, our table image isn't too good. So, therefore, we're probably not. It's probably not a good idea for us to try to run a big bluff. Similarly, if we've shown down the nuts three hands in a row, maybe that's a good opportunity to run a bluff on our opponent, again, depending on what our table image is. And how our opponents perceive us. So, our table image we briefly discussed. What is the table dynamic? Is it a very aggressive table? Is it a very tight table? Is there a bunch of fish? Is there just one fish that the game's revolving around? So, what is the table dynamic? And also, do we have a history with the villain? So, is the opponent? Have we played with them a bunch? Do they know our tendencies? Do we know their tendencies? Maybe, again, along with our table image, did we bluff them in a hand? Did we, show down three big hands against them? Did they fold three times to us? What's our table image and our history with this villain? Again, did they see us run a big bluff at the table along with the table image? Again, this is going to be very important to determining whether we see bet or not. If a player, again, feels that we're a nit and only bets the nuts, then again, this is a good spot to be bluffing against this opponent a lot because they're going to be folding a lot when we bet. And similarly, similarly to that, if we're playing up against a really, if the opponent thinks that we're a big bluffy player, then this is the type of opponent that we want to be betting our value hands very strong and betting them bigger because they're going to be calling us down lighter because they consider us to be a bluffer. Just as important, if not more important, of how do we think our opponents perceive us is how do we perceive our opponents. In order for us to make the best possible play in every hand with the information that we have to have the most information about our opponents. What do we think their tendencies are? So some of the questions we might ask are they a weak or strong opponent? What are our reads on these opponents? And with those reads, what are their tendencies? Is their calling range elastic or inelastic? We're really going to focus on this aspect of the theory part of the video because, again, I think that this is a topic that a lot of players, I think, have probably heard the term elastic and inelastic, but aren't quite sure exactly what they mean.